So I'm just going to have that there. We acknowledge with deep gratitude that we are on the territory of the Shuswap and Ktunaxa nations and the homeland of the Métis. We pay our respect to the First Nations and Métis ancestors of this place and reaffirm our relationship with one another. And so, yes, all those things, Father's Day, Indigenous Peoples Day, and the things that they share in common as we grow in grace and awareness and compassion and seek to be present with one another, with another, and with life and with nature, and seek to be in the state of presence. So I'm going to invite Carolyn and Greg to lead us in our first hymn this morning, Let Us Build a House. So beautiful. Well done. Thank you. So our words of wisdom today come from Calvin Sanborn's book, Becoming the Kind Father. And I'll be talking about what Calvin writes in his book today as part of our theme. So this is what Calvin writes in his book. Have compassion for modern man. With only one life to live, he cannot feel it. A chunk of his heart has been cut away. As he confronts life's natural shocks, he cannot feel his heart's response. He can conjure anger, but is blind to his own sorrow and fear. He seldom feels joy. He is the great pretender. Embarrassed by his feelings, he presents a mask to the world, a stoic mask of what a man should be, showing the mask to friend and foe, and even to himself. He takes the secret of his tender self to the grave. He is a stranger to his own inner life. When he looks inside himself, no one's home. He is insensitive, sometimes cruel to himself. He treats himself like a machine, a body with a job to do. Intimacy is beyond his ken. Though surrounded by people, he is lonely. Yet he strives to love in the only way he knows. Keenly aware of duty and obligation, he strives to be a good provider and protector. He spends his life in harness. He drives himself, he performs, he achieves. He believes that he must be a hero. He believes that the whole world is divided into winners and losers, and that if he loses, he will be worthless. So he won't give himself a break. Tragically, his life is not his own. It's a performance for outsiders. He simply cannot see his life through his own eyes. Instead, he constantly tracks his reflection in the eyes of spectators. He ignores his real needs and starves to death. Indeed, the cost of traditional masculinity is high. It destroys our health and our hearts. The state of men's health. The lifespan of the average man is approximately 6 years shorter than that of the average woman. Men commit suicide at a rate 4 times that of women. 2/3 of all alcoholics are men. Virtually all stress-related diseases, from hypertension to heart disease, are more common in men than in women. Almost 90% of all ulcers are in men. Compared to women, twice as many men die from accidents and 3 times as many die from homicides. According to family therapist Steve Billipouf, less than 10% of men are friends with their fathers. 80% of men suffer from the inability to identify their feelings. So that was end of that sort of information out of his book. But then Calvin Sanborn has a quote in his book that I put here. This comes from King George V, who was the grandfather of Queen Elizabeth. My father was frightened of his father. I was frightened of my father, and I am damned well going to see to it that my children are frightened of me. Quite a comment coming from the King of England that many years ago. And then Calvin Sanborn has this quote, this poem by Dorothy Law Nolte, which I'm sure all of us have heard. There's something so simple about it, but there is something very true and profound about it. So just to hear it again this morning, children learn what they live. If children live with criticism, they learn to condemn. If children live with hostility, they learn to fight. If children live with ridicule, they learn to feel shy. If children live with shame, they learn to feel guilty. If children live with encouragement, they learn confidence. If children live with tolerance, they learn patience. If children live with praise, they learn appreciation. If children live with acceptance, they learn to love. If children live with approval, they learn to like themselves. If children live with honesty, they learn truthfulness. If children live with security, they learn to have faith in themselves and in those about them. If children live with friendliness, they learn the world is a nice place in which to live. So simple and so true. The good news is that even if we missed out in the original families, we get a second chance, for we can parent and encourage ourselves. we can become our own kind fathers. Okay, time for the story. So I'm going to just.
Hey, I'm coming. Wait, I gotta put my hat on. Oh, hi.
Okay.
Hi, Brent.
Hey,
I
Benny.
put on my hat. I was listening.
Nice.
Yeah.
Oh, good. Yeah, I'm glad to see you got your Smokey hat on again.
Well, today you said Father's Day. I don't know if you know this about bears.
Yeah.
Of course, we have fathers, but the father really doesn't hang around. So we're really, it's our moms that raise us. And I don't really know my father. So I heard you say we can become our own father.
Yeah.
So I thought I'd be Smokey because I want to be a father that's like strong, and Smokey knows everything, and he's not afraid of anything. And so then that would be a father, right? Someone who's like strong and nothing scares them. Why are you making that face, Brett?
Yeah, sorry, Betty. I get it. And a lot of us human children, we want a father like that too, who's like a hero, like a superhero, like Smokey the Bear would be for you.
Yeah.
And we think, father would be, and a lot of fathers want to be like this too. They want to be like Superman, and they
or Smokey.
or Smokey. Yeah. And they want to be, they don't want to be afraid, and they don't want to be sad, and they don't want to sort of be hurt. And so they try to be super and that kind of stuff. But that's not really what makes a kind father or a healthy father.
Well, I saw that word there too, that we can be our own kind father. I didn't know what that meant, what kind of father I'd be.
Well, because the father is a hero, not just by being strong and tough or that kind of stuff, but by being kind and by giving attention and by being real. And because fathers get tired. And fathers get scared.
Really?
Yeah, because everybody gets scared. And fathers get sad.
Yeah.
And fathers, did I say fathers need to rest?
Yeah, I think I stopped listening for a second. There's so many things about father.
And fathers need to talk, and that's why they need to talk as much as we need to talk, like talk through feelings, talk through like what just happened, talk about incidences and stuff like that. So I think a father is one who accepts us and loves us and gives us attention, not just for what we do, but for who we are, and so spends time with us.
Yeah.
And but also it doesn't just show strength, like strong. But yeah.
That sounds lovely. Yeah. But I also was listening about that King guy who sort of wants his kids to be afraid of him, like a father that's it's maybe confusing to be a dad.
Well, and that's why like father bears.
Yeah.
I think that they kind of miss the program and they want everybody to be afraid of them or something like that. But anyway, that's not what we don't want children to be afraid.
No.
No.
So I'm going to try and be a kind father to myself. I'm just going to, Smokey's kind of just a story.
Right.
So I'm going to add to Smokey that he also is kind and he listens and he can be afraid and he can be sad or happy and just love me all the time. So I'll love myself.
Beautiful.
Hey.
Well done, Benny.
Thanks. Yeah. I'm a quick learner. Some dads are quick learners too.
Yeah. And I think you're on the right track to be a kind father to yourself.
Okay. Thanks a lot. Yeah. I might keep the hat on though because I like it.
I like it too.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, good to see you back, Benny.
Bye.
Bye.
Yeah. See ya.
Very good. Okay. So I'm glad Benny showed up with that Smokey the Hat sign on again. So today's lectionary reading that we're not really reading because that's not our focus, but it included these words that are really nice. So I just put them here. Are not two sparrows sold for a penny? Yet not one of them will fall to the ground apart from God. And even the hairs of your head are all counted. So do not be afraid. You are of more value than many sparrows. And so this next song that Carolyn and Greg are going to sing for us is God Sees the Little Sparrow Fall. Oops. There we go.
Hi guys, and so this is from an older hymnal, and it's a beautiful piece of music, but you will notice that the pronouns for God are all he, which is totally suitable for Father's Day in a way, but I might just change the verses, the chorus. The first time I might use the pronoun he, and the next time I might use she, and the next time they. And that's just in case we have, for inclusivity purposes, for our LGBTQ loved ones that may be even sharing a service with us today. Okay. God sees the little sparrow fall, it meets his tender view. If God so loves the little birds, I know he loves me too. He loves me too, he loves me too. I know he loves me too. Because he loves the little things, I know he loves me too. He paints the lily of the field, perfumes each lily bell. If he so loves the little flowers, I know he loves me well. She loves me too, she loves me too. I know she loves me too. Because she loves the little things, I know she loves me too. God made the little birds and flowers and all things large and small. He'll not forget his little ones, I know he loves them all. They love me too, they love me too, I know they love me too. Because they love the little things, I know they love me too.
Thank you, Carolyn and Greg. Benny Miller is going to read our scripture today. Good morning, Benny.
Good morning. So the first reading is Genesis 21, verses 8 to 21. This is a difficult text. A woman and child are turned out into a hostile wilderness. Is this the act of a man faithful to God, or a heartless, controlling husband? Or is the controlling coming from a heartless wife? Where Jewish people trace their heritage back to Isaac, Arab people trace their heritage back to Ishmael, the son of Hagar. This means then that Jewish and Arab people are in their ancestral story both descendants from Abraham. The child grew and was weaned, and Abraham made a great feast on the day that Isaac was weaned. But Sarah saw the son of Hagar, the Egyptian, while she had borne to Abraham, playing with her son Isaac. So she said to Abraham, "Cast out this slave woman with her son, for the son of this slave woman shall not inherit along with my son Isaac." The matter was very distressing to Abraham on account of his son. But God said to Abraham, "Do not be distressed because of the boy and because of your slave woman. Whatever Sarah says to do, do as she tells you, for it is through Isaac that offspring shall be named for you. As for the son of the slave woman, I will make a nation of him also, because he is your offspring." So Abraham rose early in the morning and took bread and a skin of water and gave it to Hagar, putting it on her shoulder along with the child, and sent her away. And she departed and wandered about in the wilderness of Beersheba. When the water in the skin was gone, she cast the child under one of the bushes. Then she went and sat down opposite him, a good way off, about the distance of a bow shot, for she said, "Do not let me look on the death of the child." And as she sat opposite him, she lifted up her voice and wept. And God heard the voice of the boy, and the angel of God called to Hagar from heaven and said to her, "What troubles you, Hagar? Do not be afraid, for God has heard the voice of the boy where he is. Come, lift up the boy and hold him fast with your hand, for I will make a great nation of him." Then God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water. She went and filled the skin with water and gave the boy a drink. God was with the boy, and he grew up. He lived in the wilderness and became an expert with the bow. He lived in the wilderness of Paran, and his mother got a wife for him from the land of Egypt. Second reading, a paraphrase of Ephesians 6, verses 10 to 18. Find your strength within, in yourself, rooted in God, so you will not be threatened by what is happening on the outside. Put on the whole armor of God, knowing that this armor is not like the armor of the world. Worldly armor seeks to defend us from being vulnerable. Godly armor helps us be defenseless. For our struggle is not with individuals who can only behave to the level of their consciousness. Our struggle is against the forces of ignorance and unknowingness that keep people from being their better, fuller selves. Therefore, take up the whole armor of God, realizing that on the one hand, this will make you more real and vulnerable, while on the other hand, this vulnerability will help you find your true strength. First, then, put on the armor of truth. Truth means you are willing to see things as they are, including yourself, without distortions, denials, or delusions. Next, put on the breastplate of righteousness. Seek to do what is right in all situations for all people. Seeking to do what is right will keep you on a healthy path. Then wear on your feet whatever will make you ready to proclaim the gospel of peace. It's not about someone winning and someone losing. It's about helping people recognize that needs they are trying to meet, and that there is more than one way to look at a situation. With all of these, take the shield of faith. Faith is trust, a profound trust that life in the moment is okay, despite what scary scenarios the mind might be creating. Faith is a trust that what is happening is useful for growth and awakening. Faith is a trust that there is a deeper wisdom available by which to be guided. Without trust, there is fear and a new need to force or control. Always choose faith. Next, take the helmet of salvation. This is the knowledge that when you are rooted in being, in God, you are okay. Your okayness is not dependent. Your okayness is not dependent what is happening outside of you. Next, use words well. Speak in ways that reveal truth and love. Lastly, pray in the Spirit at all times, meaning seek to stay connected to the divine source. Abide in the depth of your being. Feel the divine presence and be present in every moment and with everything in that moment, including any person in that moment. The gospel reading is Matthew 23, verses 1 to 12. It seems clear that Jesus warned his followers against ostentation and against hierarchy. It speaks to how something in people may love both. Followers of Jesus are to practice what they teach, not put burdens onto others, not do things for show, and not seek to be above others. In the time of the early church, fathers had great control over others in the family. To call no one your father on earth was to step out of its very strong system of control and hierarchy. Then Jesus said to the crowds and to his disciples, "The scribes and the Pharisees sit on Moses' seat. Therefore, do whatever they teach you and follow it, but do not do as they do, for they do not practice what they teach. They tie up heavy burdens, hard to bear, and lay them on the shoulders of others, but they themselves are unwilling to lift a finger to move them. They do all their deeds to be seen by others, for they make their phylacteries broad and their fringes long. They love to have the place of honor at banquets and the best seats in the synagogues, and to be greeted with respect in the marketplaces, and to have people call them Rabbi. But you are not to be called Rabbi, for you have one teacher, and you are all students. And call no one your father on earth, for you have one Father, the one in heaven. Nor are you to be called instructors, for you have one instructor, the Messiah. The greatest among you will be your servant. All who exalt themselves will be humbled, and all who humble themselves will be exalted." May we hear sacred wisdom through these human texts. Thanks be to God. Amen.
Thank you, Benny. Threw a few challenges in there for you to make your reading a little harder, So this morning, everybody, I'd like to share that I'm basing my words with you this morning mostly from this book by Calvin Sanborn. It's a beautiful book, Becoming the Kind Father. I bought it a few years ago, and it really made an impact on me and still does. I'm really glad I had this week to reread it and so on. Just before I talk about the book, though, I want to say that it occurs to me that it's complicated to talk about Father's Day. Father's Day is not a religious holiday, of course. It's not a Christian holiday, and so it's a cultural event. And sometimes cultural events really becomes iconic or idolatrous in our lives in a way. And just a little history: it was in 1914 that President Woodrow Wilson in the United States declared the second Sunday of May to be Mother's Day, and Canada soon followed suit. It wasn't until 1972 that President Nixon declared the third Sunday of June to be Father's Day, and Canada soon followed suit. So it took many years later. It was kind of like, okay, we have to recognize fathers, because we've been making a deal of Mother's Day for a number of decades now. And so anyway, it hasn't been that long that we've had a Father's Day. And in the Jesus story, which is, I like to word it that way, the Jesus story. So because sometimes we don't know if Jesus actually said these things, or like we try and figure out what did Jesus actually say, or what did his followers say. But in the Jesus story, there wasn't an elevation of the role of fathers in people's lives. There actually was a dethroning of the power and role of fathers, because it was such a powerful position. Men, fathers, really got to dictate not only how people in their family had to live, but what they had to think and believe in. And so to extricate yourself out of the control of the father, the mindset of the father, was a powerful, necessary step in order to have a mind of your own and to follow your own inner wisdom and the wisdom of God. And so very strong messages. And even the one about call no one on earth your father, especially if you understand that for many people, father was a very controlling figure. And it's almost like having a pharaoh in your head that rules you, and to stop listening to Pharaoh, to dethrone Pharaoh. So I guess one of the images that came to my mind this week is when they're taking down statues of Confederate people in the United States. In some ways, the Jesus story, Jesus kind of pulled down that idolatry of the father in people's lives back in his time. But it's also complicated because, of course, everybody has a different experience and relationship with their father. And some of you had a wonderful relationship with your father, and it's so lovely. I mean, some relationships with fathers have been so beautiful and supportive, and people, if the father has passed away, they just miss them and so on. And then there's other people for whom that wasn't their experience, and there are wounds or brokenness and just things that they wish were different, and so all of it is okay and all of it belongs, but it's very hard to talk about fatherhood or our relationships with our fathers and speak to everybody. So what I'm going to share for you today speaks to me because I think I had a similar experience to what the author of this book had. And Calvin Sanborn was born in the early 1950s. I'm guessing 1951, so he's a bit older than I am. I was born in 1958. But back then, men were very much more, I think, controlled by what we call patriarchy, although it's still with us today. And I know that there's young families where there's estrangement between father and children. And so this is not just something that happened a generation or two ago, but I know my mom and dad sort of lived in that time when they lived roles, and my dad lived a role, and I think he paid a cost for that, and we paid a cost for that. And this is a little bit of what I want to talk about today. And you know, when I read Calvin Sanborn's book, I was actually on a conference, and I was out walking in the evening, and I was bawling my eyes out. I had to find a parking lot that was far away from everybody because the book was really being emotional for me, and that was a good thing. You might enjoy the book. He begins in the book, and I'm just going to touch on a few items, of course, but he talks about a Greek mythological story in which a son is raised alone by his mother because his father is the king of Athens, and his father has gone off to fight wars and is the king. And so his mother has raised him, and when he becomes 16 on his birthday, his mom takes him to a place to give him the gift of his father. And that before his father left, his father buried this treasure and to be passed on to his son when his son became a man. And so what the treasure is, as the boy, the 16-year-old young man unearths it, it's the royal armor. His father is passing the royal armor from one generation down to the next generation. And the armor is just what you think of with armor. It's shield, it's sword, but it's the mail and so on that you put on the body, the armor that a man would wear going into war. And so the boy sort of gladly starts to put on his father's armor and then goes off to join his father to fight these wars and to be part of the politics of the day and so on. And Calvin Sanborn talks about how we may unwittingly or unknowingly as men pick up our father's armor. That men learn or feel that they need to have armor on in order to make it through this world, to fight the battles and to be protectors and providers and so on. And of course, the armor is quite invisible. It's psychological armor. All of us know what that's like a bit, because all of us know what it's like to put on armor. You know, we go out to the store and we may not be having a great day, but people say, "Hi, how are you?" And you go, "Ah, I'm wonderful, I'm great." We know what it's like to put on social armor, how to put on a mask, how to defend ourselves, put walls up, and be a bit impervious, and to defend ourselves. And men may know this a lot better than women. And so we put on masks, we put on armor, be strong, be tough, be together, be in charge, know what you're doing, pretend you know what you're doing, don't ask directions, don't ask instructions don't show you're weak. And those kinds of things are part of the armor that we put on. I've seen it in boys, I've seen it in myself, but I've seen it in boys. You know, we used to coach soccer, and I can remember this one beautiful young boy when he was about 9 years old. He got hit by a soccer ball in the face, and he just immediately started crying. He had to come off to the side of the pitch for a little while to collect himself, and then before he went out again. By the time he was playing U16, he could have got kicked in the face. There is no way that that young man was going to cry any longer in front of his peers. And I saw that. And it's like in a few years, young men, yeah, you just put on armor. Calvin Sanborn talks about, his second chapter is about patriarchy's price. Patriarchy, he defines as an age-old system where father is in charge of the family. It's an age-old system, patriarchy, and it's a laddered society. And we've talked about this recently, this laddered society of hierarchy, and the father is at the top. And below the father might be the mother, but at some point it might not even be the mother. It might not be the woman. It might be the eldest son. And, you know, this is the way it kind of used to be. And I know I grew up in a home that was laddered. We all kind of knew who the king of the house was. My mother certainly knew what her role was. It was a subservient role. And it was never questioned. It was never talked about. My dad, you know, grew up in England, and he knew that his role was to be the provider, but it was more than that. It was just to be. I mean, there was times I remember when I was wondering if my mom and dad would join me on a little trip I was thinking of, and there was no point in me going to talk to my mother, because if I did, my mother said, "Well, go talk to your dad," because my dad made all those decisions, and my mother would go along with whatever my dad decided. But patriarchy's price, because that laddered society, that hierarchy, it's about having power over, not being with. There's such a difference between having power over or being with another human being. And being with someone is just a whole different way of relating. And so many men, and my father included, I think ended up feeling an estrangement between he and my mother and he and us children. He didn't have many friends. He didn't join things. And so there's a loneliness, a dullness, a grayness that men can live in their isolation and estrangement, their lack of connection. And when they don't connect to their own selves, when they don't connect to their own feelings, it's really hard to connect to someone else's feelings and enter into an intimate relationship, a soulful relationship. I remember years ago going to see a counselor, and one of the things the counselor said to me that really jumped out is, know in its role and know in its soul. And he said, you are a classic adult child from a dysfunctional family, and you're totally out of touch with your feelings, and you play a role, and there's a place for role, but for the most part, we need to be able to live soul, and that is to connect to people, to relate to people, to have a intimate kind of relationships with people. And so I love that line, know in its role and know in its soul. My dad did the role pretty well, and he's really struggled with the soul stuff. And I did too. I do too. And so in his book, Calvin Sanborn talks about saying goodbye to the harsh father, because he was 13 years old when his dad died, but he had lived with his dad long enough to internalize his dad's critical, controlling, harsh voice. And so Calvin went on in his life. He got married, he had children of his own, but he began to feel like his own distress. And so he entered counseling. And he was talking in the counselor's office one time so negatively to himself that he's not good enough, that he's not a good enough husband and not a good enough father. And the counselor said, "Whose voice is speaking to you right now?" And he says, "This is the voice of my father." He had internalized his father's voice growing up, that he wasn't good enough, that he should try harder, he should, all that kind of stuff. And so he had lived this driven life, unfortunately, that drove him away from his own family and people that he loved. And so going through his own therapy and counseling, one of the things that Calvin Sandborn began to do is to become his own kind father. He realized that he needed to replace the harsh voice of his father in his head with a kind father voice that he had to, in some ways, imagine. He had to make it up, but he had to become aware of it and then speak kindly to himself. And there's 4 A's that he uses that are so beautiful. I find that the fact that they all start with A is helpful, but one is attention. Just giving attention is what a kind father does. And it's not like, hey, like, we're leaving in 5 minutes, grab your stuff, we can't be late. That's not that kind of attention, but giving attention is so important. And then there's approval or acceptance. I mean, they all start with A, but acceptance is such a kind father thing to do, to live with acceptance, not criticism and judgment and rejection. And then appreciation. And then the last one is affection. It doesn't need to be a last one. We all need to sort of wonder, what would a kind father be like? What's a kind father? How would a kind father speak to us? And is that the voice that we can speak to ourselves? A kind mother, kind father voice inside of us. So we're nurturing, we're supportive, we're encouraging, we're consoling, we're understanding, and accepting, appreciating, affection. So when he began to become his own kind father, the next thing for him was to give attention to whatever he was feeling. And so he began a practice of every day, throughout the day, he would check in with himself as a kind father would check and say, "How are you doing? What are you feeling?" And whatever you're feeling is okay. And just be with it, give it attention. And then what he found was that he was really out of touch with his emotions and feelings. And as I reread the book, I guess this week I've been thinking, I probably have a vocabulary of about three emotion words, sadness, madness, gladness. I don't know. I don't have a big, maybe I'm being harsh on myself here. I think it'd be helpful for me to keep broadening my vocabulary of feeling words, and then just discerning the difference between subtle feelings. As he talks about in his book, there's a difference between being discouraged and being in despair. There's so many different ways to see and articulate how our internal life is, and so to pay attention to those. And that he found that when he gave his feelings and his emotions attention, they would pass. And he began to be more at home in his own skin. He began to feel alive and relaxed, and this intimacy, in a sense, with himself began, which then helped him to be a kind father to his own children and to his own grandchildren. So it's a beautiful book. And it's beautiful to see how this beautiful man was able to put behind him some of the pain and sorrow and sadness and unhealthfulness that he experienced growing up with his poor dad. He learned to be compassionate on his dad, because as he himself healed, he was able to see his dad in much more compassionate ways, as I know I was able to experience with my own dad. For many years, I had to manage my dad. there were certain things that I would never talk about with my dad. I had to I felt like I needed to direct conversations and so on because, well, my dad loved to talk about himself. And so I would just let my dad talk about himself. And then there was other things I just wouldn't bring up with my dad because my dad didn't know that he didn't know. He didn't want to say he didn't know something. So I wouldn't ask my dad's advice because I don't know if my dad could ever say, well, I don't really know much about that, which would have been so wise and so beautiful. Tell me more, Dad. It's when you feel like you have to know everything that then I don't really want to talk to you because you don't know what you don't know. But anyway, that was a little side note there. And, but I think I shared with you a few weeks ago how before my dad died, we just had some beautiful connecting words and moments. And I don't see my dad as a villain by any means. Though I can feel that in a different time and a different way, he could have experienced life differently, and that would have been a blessing for him. A different quality of marriage, a different quality of relationship with us children. And I'm sorry that he missed out on some of that. And so in closing, I want to just say that being a father is a hero's journey. So is being a mother. But it's not a hero as in the old way we used to think of heroes, as again, putting on armor, being strong and tough. And maybe there's many men who grew up in a time when that was the story, the message of how men needed to be. But we're all on the journey now of finding out how to be a different hero, a hero who takes off armor, a hero who takes down masts and walls, and a hero who is open to emotions and feelings and is vulnerable and is able to talk about those, and who chooses connection and relationship over anything else. What does it matter to have your head full of opinions about things, but to have an estranged relationship with your children? What does it matter to be right when you push people away? It just doesn't matter. What really matters is connecting and feeling like a soulful relationship. So we need to we need to value what really matters. So today on Father's Day, it gives us an opportunity to reflect on these things, which of course is a reflection on us on this journey of being human in a faithful way. And what a great opportunity we have to reflect on this and where we're at, and hopefully the grace of God just helps us to continue to blossom, to be the people that God wants us to be, that we want to be. Thank you for listening to me again today. Okay, so Carolyn and Greg are going to sing, just make sure I got the right verse there. And thanks for singing our next hymn.
Would you bless our homes and families, source of life who calls us here, in our world of stress and tension, teach us love that conquers fear. Help us learn to love each other with a love that constant stays. Teach us when we face our troubles, love's expressed in many ways. Teach us, God, to claim as family everyone whose life we share. And through all that life may offer, may we in your love remain. May the love we share in families be a life to praise your name. Let us reach beyond the boundaries of our daily thought and care, till the family you have chosen spills its love out everywhere. Help us learn to love each other with a love that constant stays. Teach us when we face our troubles, love expressed in many ways.
Thanks, Carolyn and Greg. I'm going to lead us in our prayer time this morning, and there's kind of two parts. I'm going to just lead us in a kind of a prayer time, and then I'm going to go to some words that are printed on the screen partway through, prayerful words that were written by Maggie Dieter and Bill Snow, who are part of Indigenous life and justice work and ministries in Western Canada and in the United Church. And so we'll close with their prayers on this day of the National Indigenous Day of Prayer and National Indigenous Peoples Day. But please let me lead us in a time of prayer. So gracious God, we do have a moment to be still and present wherever we are and connected to each other through this medium. We seek to, and we want to be, and we are thankful for life in its fullness, which is life on the surface. This time of year, just so much that is verdant and lush and growing and giving and alive and beautiful. And also life that is just a part of everything, the life that's in our bodies, the life that animates the cells of our bodies, the same life that's in the cells of a bird or animal, a tree, an insect. It's all your life. And we thank you for the life that is full in the depths of our being. All is well. And there is a completeness and an enoughness that is always present. And so we get in touch with that. We thank you for a day when we get to reflect on men and the role that they have to be fathers, and all that is a part of this, the deep challenge it is to be a human being, and let alone to be a parent and a caregiver and a nurturer. And so we think of the men who were fathers to us, who are fathers to us, who were fathers to us. And we're grateful for them, grateful for their journeys and their struggles, their learnings, and the gifts that came through them. And we who are fathers or grandfathers and all of us who have influence on other people's lives, may we learn to be kind, fathers, mothers, people, and reflect on what that means, how to be kind to ourselves, how to be nurturing and allowing and accepting and interested and inquisitive and open and spacious, and create safe places to be ourselves and for other people to be who they are. And thank you for this day as we get to remember our Indigenous people, brothers and sisters in our lives. Grateful for the ones that we know and ones that we are open to knowing and sharing our lives with them. And how all of our lives are richer and broader for the diversity that we bring. And now I'd like to read the words that are written by Maggie and Bill for this day of Indigenous prayer. God, creator and great mystery, we praise you for the sacred fires that burn today and for the prayer-filled smoke that you receive and bless. We offer our deep gratitude that the fire's light informs and guides our journey. We pray, just as the elders prayed, for renewal and for the restoration of beauty to the land and its people. We acknowledge the diverse and abundant gifts of Canada's Indigenous peoples. We recognize that their knowledge and wisdom have benefited generations past and present, and that this blessing will continue for generations to come. We remember the many who are committed to the healing of family, community, and nations. We pray for Mother Earth, the waters, the winds, for our siblings, the animals, birds, and fish, and all of life that surrounds us. We pray that we will walk the good red road of life, and that we will walk with courage, honesty, humility, love, respect, truth, and wisdom. We offer this prayer in humility and hope, and in the name of our brother Jesus, the one who lights our path to wholeness, justice, and peace. Amen. And ask Carolyn and Greg to lead us in our last hymn today, Like a River of Tears.
Like a river of tears, your love pours upon us. Like a sunshine of blessing, your grace will sustain us. Like a star-studded sky, your spirit shines o'er us, renewing our spirit with courage. Like a burden-free flight by windows around us, like a wind in the forest that breathes life among us, like a phoenix that's rising from ashes around us, renewing our spirits with vision and grace. Like a pillar of cloud, you promise to guide us. Like a bright fiery bush, you come to speak to us. Like a calm, cooling breeze, your spirit breathes in us, renewing our spirits with loving and like a lover's caress, your spirit revives us. Like a song of the soul, you come to be with
That's so beautiful. Thank you. Our benediction and blessing. As our service comes to a close, we may be thankful for times of self-reflection on who we are and the relationships that we are in. We are given great responsibility, the ability to respond, and we are given great opportunity, a set of circumstances that make it possible to do something. Whenever we are in a relationship with another human being, we can step out of our programming and be present. Life, God, can show us how to die to that which does not work and come alive to that which does. And we can connect not only to another and to God, but also to ourselves. Let us take our awareness into the moments of relationship and relating ahead, trusting in the love, wisdom, and guidance of presence that is divine. Amen.